There are some Pokemon out there that for one reason or another, we know they exist, but to this point, we have never gotten the chance to see them. That is extremely fascinating to me, so in this video, I'm gonna be covering some of these Pokemon and give you a glimpse at what they could look like. To give you one example of the kind of Pokemon I'm talking about, we have the Lost Flower Bunny Pokemon. Prior to the release of Pokemon X and Y, Game Freak developer Hironobu Yoshida mentioned in an interview with Nintendo Life that he once created a rabbit Pokemon with a flower on its nose, but it was scrapped due to seemingly not making sense within its environment. So, thanks to this interview, we know that this scrapped Pokemon exists, but we have never gotten a chance to see it, even with all of the leaks that have happened in recent years. So, with the idea here being that I wanted to try and create a glimpse at what these mysterious Pokemon could look like, here is how this Flower Bunny Pokemon might have appeared. As always, a big shout out goes to my guy Rgreywind for drawing the artwork of these designs, and if you would like, you can check him out with the links in the description. Just like Yoshida stated, you can see that this design is a rabbit with a flower around its nose, and the idea, the way I interpreted it, was that the flower petals around its nose could sort of double as whiskers, which I feel like makes a lot of sense within this concept. Since all that Yoshida told us about this Pokemon, though, was its basic description, we are pretty much left to guess about everything else regarding this Pokemon. Given that it is a flower-themed Pokemon, though, the grass type is pretty much a lock. Given that it's also a rabbit, it could have also potentially been a normal type too. Or, if it was planned for X and Y specifically, there is a possibility that it could have also been a fairy type, as it's pretty easy to imagine how a Pokemon as cute as this would possibly end up as a fairy type in the region that introduced fairies. All of that is total speculation, but I do feel pretty good about saying that this Pokemon was probably going to be at least one or possibly two of these three types. We also don't even have a sniff of what this Pokemon's name would have been, so I've decided to just tentatively call it Florabbit, coming from Flora and Rabbit. Whether or not this thing made sense within its environment, there is a high likelihood that it was a cutie, as you can see here. But cute isn't exactly the approach of this next Pokemon, because another kind of Pokemon in this category are ones that are mentioned within the games themselves that are never explicitly shown to us. For instance, one of those is the true form of Arceus. In Pokemon Legends Arceus, after defeating Arceus at the end of the game, Arceus essentially joins you of its own accord, and that's how you obtain it. And in doing so, Arceus says, "And I bestow upon thee a part of myself." This implies that the Arceus we see isn't the whole Arceus that created the universe and is the god of the Pokemon world, but rather, as Arceus says, is just a part, meaning that there is a godly entity out there somewhere that we have not gotten the chance to see. That is all we have to go on with this Pokemon though in terms of a description, and as ambiguous and frankly intimidating a prospect as it is to try and visualize what God could look like, this is what we have come up with. It's obviously still very Arceus-like, but that is because it's kind of imagined as Arceus's very own origin form. Since Giratina has one, and now Dialga and Palkia do too, it only makes sense for Arceus to also have an origin form. And since what Arceus is implying as its true self is essentially what an origin form for it would be, it made sense to interpret it as just that. Another cool thing that you could also kind of visualize with this design too are the armor-like pieces that help to make up its body. While they are meant to be a sort of armor, you can also sort of visualize them as pieces of an eggshell, which would represent the egg that Arceus came out of when the universe began, with this form essentially being the moment when Arceus burst out of its shell. If this form of Arceus were to ever actually exist, I can only imagine that it would probably retain the normal typing of regular Arceus, just like all of the other origin forms retain the typings of their regular forms. With that said, I personally would also give this form of Arceus an absolutely busted ability that I am going to call Deify. It essentially would be a crazy upgraded version of Multitype, Protean, and Libero, where every turn the user could choose which type they wanted Arceus to be. So if you started with Normal and then your opponent brought out a Fighting type, you could change Arceus into a Psychic type or a Flying type. This would also correlate with Arceus' signature move, Judgment, as well, meaning that you would basically always have a type and a move that would be super effective against your opponent. Yes, that would be beyond broken and is entirely made up on my part, but a God Pokemon is pretty much the one time where you can justifiably include some ridiculously overpowered stuff. And if this Arceus form ever did actually happen, I would hope that Game Freak would also do something similar. The designs and artwork in this video are all made possible with your support, and a great way to help support them is through my merch store. There's plushies and trading cards of my Fakemon that you can grab there, and they're honestly insanely cool, and they just help out the channel a lot. You can check it all out with the link in the description, and whether you grab some booster packs, a Fulkachi plush, or a Narwade plush, you can't go wrong, and it all directly goes into keeping the channel going and to continue making it better and better. So check that out with the link in the description, and thank you so much for all your support. We are now going to transition though and look at another scrapped Pokemon. Similar to the Flower Bunny from before, it was also revealed in an interview with Game Freak staff that there were once plans for a Pokemon based on the very first cloned sheep. But this idea was scrapped because it was thought to be too controversial for Pokemon. So again, another revelation of an immensely interesting Pokemon, but to this day, no artwork or sprite has ever been uncovered for it. So I am going to show you what a Pokemon with this concept could have potentially looked like. And this regional variant Wooloo is what I believe to be a pretty good representation of it. It is important to note, however, that the actual cloned sheep Pokemon wouldn't have really been a Wooloo specifically, since it is thought to have originally been intended for Generation 2. But since Wooloo itself is just a basic looking sheep Pokemon, and also is an actual Pokemon that we could use as a base instead of just some made up design, I figured that using it as a base might provide an even more realistic look at what this Pokemon could have been, while also providing my own modern twist on the idea at the same time. I imagine that the backstory of this Pokemon could be that a scientist in a region where Wooloo is not native attempted to clone the Pokemon, but it wasn't exactly a perfect clone and therefore came out looking slightly differently and created a regional variant. I also thought that with this concept, Wooloo's hair braids could be made to look like the DNA double helix, which I just thought was a perfect fit and is another reason why I wanted to interpret this Pokemon this way. And since the cloning aspect of this Pokemon was obviously the key trait behind it, I personally imagine that Psychic is probably going to be the only type that really makes any sense. It could also be Normal or any number of other types in all honesty, but if the concept of cloning is truly the marquee nature and point of this Pokemon, then the type would naturally have to reflect that. And with cloning being such a sci-fi-like concept, Psychic is the one type that, in my opinion, feels like it fits the best. And while that and the whole regional variant idea is a bit more of an artist's interpretation type of angle, it is what I believe to be a solid representation of how this Pokemon could have looked and what it would have been like, and is a great interpretation of how it could look, in my opinion, if that idea was ever reintroduced today. Next, we're gonna travel to the land of Sinnoh and take a look at a particular Pokemon from this region. Shellos was introduced in Generation 4 and is known for its 2 forms, but according to the Pokédex, it has even more forms than that. Its dex entry in Pokemon Diamond says that its colors and shapes differ from region to region. In the Sinnoh region, 2 types are confirmed. We've only ever seen the 2 types that come from Sinnoh to this point, but this dex entry outright says that in other regions there are other Shelloses with differing colors and shapes, ones that to this point we have never seen before. So in interpreting what these other Shellos could look like, this is one option for how one variant of them could appear. The way this dex entry describes them, these Shellos would definitely be regional variants in today's day and age. So this is a Shellos that comes from some region that we have not seen before that verifies the claims made by this dex entry. The following is purely my own take on this idea, but this particular design I've decided to make a ghost type, which is based on the Ghost Slug. And that was just too good of an opportunity not to take advantage of, so I just went ahead and went for it. However, the fun thing about this concept is that the dex says that Shellos' forms differ from region to region, meaning that Shellos could potentially have multiple regional variants. Therefore, there are a lot of different ways that this could be explored, and there could hypothetically be Shelloses of a bunch of different types out there, just waiting to be discovered. And I, for one, think that that would be really cool to see in the game someday. Moving along though, I have got yet another one that originates from the pages of the Pokédex, but this time, instead of a lowly slug Pokemon, it concerns a legendary dragon Pokemon. In Regidrago's Sword dex entry, it says that an academic theory proposes that Regidrago's arms were once the head of an ancient dragon Pokemon. The theory remains unproven. So the Pokédex admits that this is just a theory, but nevertheless presents the idea as a possibility. So what if this theory of an ancient, never-before-seen dragon Pokemon is true? What would it look like? Well, maybe something like this. First and foremost, it naturally has the head that makes up Regidrago's arms, and also consists of many of the same colors as Regidrago as well, which only makes sense if you consider that this Pokemon was essentially used to make Regidrago. I also imagined it as a pure dragon type, just like Regidrago as well, and personally, I feel like that is probably the best bet as far as its typing goes. I also admittedly didn't spend too long on thinking of a name for this guy, since that doesn't really have to do with the lore that we actually know about it, and is essentially just going to be a guess on my part, but for the sake of the video, I have come up with the name Dragonagon, which essentially just comes from the word dragon twice. However, that does symbolize how there's 2 dragon Pokémon involved in this story. This one, and the one that was made from it in Regidrago. I would love to get to see this one for real someday, and while we probably won't, to be honest, I still love when we get little bits of lore like this, both in and outside of the games, that let us know that there are more Pokemon out there that we have never seen before. Be sure to let me know which one of these Pokemon is your favorite in the comments, and leave a like if you enjoyed the video. It is super appreciated, and with that said, I will see you guys with another video soon. Until then, thanks so much for watching, I really appreciate it, and I will smell you guys later.